Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Roundtable by Planet Underground, hosted in Las Vegas at CGA's Fall Summit. Special thanks to those joining on a live stream. I'm Jimmy Wang with the Creative Partners. I'm going to have our panelists quickly introduce themselves, their name, company, and position, and then we'll get to started. Can we start with Sara?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sara Magruder Lyle. I'm President and CEO of the Common Ground Alliance.
I'm Chris Work with Stallion Communications. We are a fiber to the home provider, working in a couple of different states in the southern United States right now.
I'm Brandon Long, and I'm with On the Spot UtiliSource. I'm Vice President and co-owner of the company. We do damage prevention.
Hi, and I'm Josh Hinrichs. I'm the president of UtiliSource.
Thank you. So the topic for this session is excavators and locators at the forefront. And I'll start off with a question, and then you all feel free to jump in and discuss amongst yourselves. So from the excavators and locators perspective, how can we improve the safety and efficiency of excavation and damage prevention practices? Anyone want to feel free to jump in?
Take it.
You go first, Josh.
Well, I think there's obviously a lot of opportunity to, improve in those areas. I think the first thing it starts with is just some baseline communication amongst those groups and making sure that we're understanding what everybody's trying to accomplish as we go into the field, large projects, small projects, all those things. It really matters a lot. If you're working on a single lot on a house, that's a lot different proposition than if you're trying to install fiber to the home network and you're going to be crossing a city over the next 6 or 8 months.
No, I agree 100% with you. Communication is the key to it. That's the big part of it, but there's also the accountability part of it, because what I'm running into on my side right now are these operators that have been collecting revenue for the last 40 years that have failed to upgrade and get with the latest and greatest technology that's out there. And at the end of the day, it's causing a bottleneck on my side. And so, communication is key. Yes, they need to know that we're coming. But once we get there, we get to the roundtable, we got to come up with a solution. The current contracts I have right now have liquidated damages on the backside of it. Prior to going into there, read the law, the rules, the regulations when I'm going into whatever county, town we're going into. Mm-hmm. So, okay, yeah, it's doable. Then when we get there, we find out that the operator has failed to maintain, so they don't know where their lines are. So they blame it on lack of locators, it's lack of whatever. So when we bring the problem to the table, we brought a solution as well. We were actually going to pay for a third-party locator to come in and locate their infrastructure. But they turned it down, which ultimately I feel like is because they truly do not know where their third-party lines are, or where their lines are, and this third party is going to expose that. So communication is a big part of it, but accountability, I believe. So, the Railroad Commission, if you're in Texas, the Pipeline Safety Bureau, if you're in New Mexico, the whoever, wherever you are, needs to start holding these people accountable, as opposed to just, they've collected revenue for 40 years, haven't reinvested in their infrastructure. So.
Yeah, and I think too, with the communication side of things, as far as getting all on the same page, getting the information on the forefront on these bigger projects, especially whenever your customer is going to be doing these large projects. It's hard to accommodate to staff, to train, to get them up to speed quickly in the time frames that these projects do.
And I agree 100% with that. We can't show up there with 40 drills on day one and expect you guys to be able to locate it, or whatever local infrastructure. But there has to be within reason. And right now, in one particular market we're in right now, I'm getting 3,500 feet a day. A week of locates from a utility company that has collected revenue for 40 years.
We just stepped out of a next practices meeting, and everything that you just said is what we talked about, which is accountability, communication. The problem is one of the things that really started next practices is there was a conversation between a CGA excavator and locator, and said, well, if we could just talk to each other and figure out what the issue is. But If we're only communicating about the issue, the system has already failed us, right? But there's not one, right? There's not one piece of it that's going to fix it. It's incumbent upon the operators to make sure that they're arming their excavators, their locators, with what they need. And if you're going to if you're going to do a project and come in and say, surprise, we're here, you have to have the manpower to do that. And manpower is a challenge, not just in our industry, but everywhere right now. But a lot of this, I know we're saying that the excavators and locators are at the forefront, but it's all driven by what the operator does.
Also,
Yeah.
too, oh, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
Well, the statutes too also play a big part in those types of relationships
Yes.
and some of those agreements as well, because when you have statutes that are antiquated at best, they don't keep up with the industry's statuses and standards. And so when we're accelerating at light speed, it's not just some of those operators that are on the forefront. It's the small municipal utilities, it's the water and sewer districts and these very small utilities that are on the receiving end of negative, everything negative that comes with these big projects and ticket volume influxes and things of that nature.
Part of the challenge is they're also often exempt.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem in several states, which is, it's great if you have, mandatory reporting, but if you don't have mandatory membership, that's a problem. I mean, we know that, water and sewer, you pretty much going below everything else. There's a real risk there. And it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, and if you're right, you're dealing with the largest of the large and small folks who don't have a lot of resources. What you're talking about makes a lot of sense. For a lot of those legacy providers, there's not a lot of incentive for them to come make it easy for you to overbuild them, right? So that is part of the problem. The other half of the problem, though, really is these smaller municipalities and stuff that they don't have good plant records. They don't have the resources to go out and do the locates, even if they wanted to. And trust me, they do want to protect their infrastructure. So coming to them with
if it's water,
solutions,
a water line, but at the end of the day, a gas line, electrical line,
yeah.
where they don't,
yeah,
we work with the smaller municipalities when we come into an area. We have to. We know that, they're not going to be able to handle the influx. So we give them leadway in that. But when you have someone that's legitimately been collecting revenue on a gas or an electric, and you don't know where your utility is, granted, whether it's gas or electric or whoever's causing the issue, all the other utilities in the area are keeping up. So it's doable. But it's this one entity that's not doing it, and they're not being held accountable.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, gas always gets the front page because it ignites. But just last week here on the Strip, there was a water line hit, and they had to evacuate the entire hotel. 1,600 people had to leave, right? And you think about all the lost income, the traffic disruptions, the first responder disruptions.
Not to mention, if something catches fire, they're
Right.
unable to suppress
That's right.
it. There's a multitude. Every utility carries and warrants its own level of severity.
And I agree. But if you have a water line that will displace 1,600 people, surely they knew where it was. Whereas, a 3/4 inch gas line could theoretically blow up a house.
Yeah, but that's the number one reason people don't call is because they thought they knew where it was.
No,
or they,
I'm
you
not
know.
saying that we know where
No,
it is, but the
but-
infrastructure would know where it was, the owner. I would like to think.
Maybe. That's part of the challenge is people say, well, we don't know where all of our stuff is. Well, okay, fine. I don't necessarily think you're going to know where everything is from 50, 60, 70 years ago, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't start mapping it now.
Correct.
right.
Well, and they, and a lot of these entities, they had inherited the problems that are currently
That's right.
what they're tasked with. So people weren't good stewards for them, and that's where fostering in a moment of change to where we can be good stewards for the future us. That's the biggest thing right there.
In the markets that we worked in where they've had trouble, the gas companies such as, if we open it up, we find it, hey, bring a market ball out here, bring your stuff out here, update your software.
Right.
Because we're not going to be the last one through here. And I don't want the guys coming behind me to experienced the same problems I had. If you can send somebody out here and do it, and more times than not, they said, hey, we don't have the manpower to get out there, backfill it and roll
You
with it.
just hit the nail on the head, which is if you think about the risk of error that we're putting into the system by every time somebody going through the same place and having to locate
Yeah.
the same thing and not picking, I mean, there's so much information that you pick up when you're locating that we don't use for a variety of reasons. I mean, we are creating the risk of a dig-in as an industry because you're asking people to go and do the same thing. I'm confident whatever is on the strip has been located, 1,000 times this year for a variety of things. So why are we putting the people that are on the job site at risk? We should be GPSing that information, and we should be obligated to collect it and keep it.
Well, I'll tell you another aspect of it too is, I was doing some work at a local university where I'm from, and there was 4 water lines in this particular area indicated on the prints and records. The problem is there wasn't 4, there was only 1. But through the years, they had different engineering firms coming in, and not one of them, and due to liability purposes, did not want to omit or make those changes because they weren't confident in those types of records and prints. So they added another one where they thought it was. And so then it became this monstrosity, basically. And so it took some convincing, hey, let's daylight this section. I can assure you there's only 1 here. And
Yeah.
so we were able to confirm that and then be able
And when
to
it's-
refine that.
And when it's daylighted, then you have to take the opportunity to get that lat long coordinate right then.
Yeah.
So that information can be captured. You've got a photograph that you can take with that. You can confirm, yeah, that's the water line that I'm looking for. We know it's here now. You can eliminate the other 3 on the plant record and move forward with confidence to know that we found it. Maybe not the entirety of it, but certainly in this area, in this line, we know it's here.
Yeah.
And those are things are really helpful. Now, whether the facility owner will use that the first time or not, that's a question that's up to the facility owner. But when we have it daylighted, even if they won't come out and capture the information, we've taken the tack now. Look, we've got it daylighted. We're going to go ahead and not only trace the marks that were put on the ground in the first place with GPS coordinates, we're also marking where we found it. And we're able to do some pretty interesting stuff with that data to figure out accuracy of marks and different things. It's really, at the end of the day, it's not as much about mitigating our liability as it is about improving our quantity of safe footage throughout the course of the day, week, month. And that's really started to help because we've run into the same things that you were running into. And over time, we've started to build trust with some of these companies where they are coming out, they're dedicating resources to our projects. They know that we're not going to waste their time calling them out on unnecessary locates or calling them back on stuff that we should have got right in the first place. So that really has helped us get our footage numbers up.
And UtiliSource has, I'm going to, stump for you guys for a little bit. They did one of our first CGA case studies about the importance of mapping. And frankly, the first round was a bit scary about how off some of the mapping was, like not feet, but like, across the street off. And they've been able to show that there is an economic benefit and an efficiency, right? A lot of the things we're talking about, it is an efficiency issue, right? It's costing money because you're not being able to do what you need to do when you need to do it. I think that case study has helped change the mentality around this, which is instead of getting the no, we can't from the operators, written, okay, well, we can do this. We can figure out a way to make it better. It's slow. I mean, it's incremental. But there's a lot of incomings into the equation here that make it a challenge that we have to address.
Yeah. And always try to keep in mind the underdogs that are always seem to be trailing. So back in Indiana too, I mean, it's actually kind of shocking on how many people or operators still receive tickets via fax. I mean, so that just shows like some of their old processes are still in place. And it's just, it's just a product of the time. And it's something to keep in mind as we are moving forward. And it's not us here today at this roundtable or at the CGAs. It's the ones that don't have that opportunity and ability to be present. They just don't have the resources.
That's one of the things with the Damage Prevention Institute is we've really tried to create an avenue for smaller companies to participate, because we know that they can't afford always to come to this meeting or a national meeting, but that they can get that information, they can participate in the peer reviews because they're, they're remote, they're virtual, pardon me. And that's the group we see, whether it's an operator, locator, whoever it is, it's that 10 to 50 group that is a challenge. And that's pretty much just a business thing. It's not this industry. You've gotten over, 10. You have too many people that you can just sit around the table and do what we're doing. You have to put in some bureaucracy and you're trying to put it in, but it may not be enough, or you have to do, and it's that middle space that can be a challenge. And that's a lot of the people out there that are doing work.
Well, I
It'd be
think too,
super beneficial for us if, I mean, just for instance, we're working in Houston, well, at the end of the street, now you could potentially be in a whole different municipality.
Right.
Well, we've called in the whole street and it, ABC Water Company, well, now we've gone to the end of the street and it's 1, 2, 3. And
Yeah.
we had a water line, we called it, but that's not my water line.
Yeah.
If there was some way to put all that together on our side, it would be fantastic.
And we have technicians that now that, as we're building these networks, that are just wholly dedicated to that. That is all they do, is go out and work in that 811 process ahead of these crews. And they're the ones that are responsible for figuring that kind of stuff out. Hey, it looks like the water company responded. But we know, because we have people out there doing that kind of work and figuring out where the delineation is between one utility and another. They understand that water company A responded,
Right.
B didn't. They'll make the phone call, get that resolved long before a crew ever gets there and realizes we don't have locates. And now we're sitting there at hundreds of dollars an hour waiting on locates, as opposed to having this technician who's out working in front of multiple crews, handling all the documentation, all the recalls, all that stuff up front. And it helps us just up our footages and reduce our damages dramatically.
and I tell you too, there's it goes on all different ends of the spectrum, and it's, you've got great contractors, you got great locators, and you got, great operators, you got all these different, extremes on every front. And, but some of the things that occur, and it occurs more often than not, is when we go out and we'll do our services for an entire subdivision and they don't get to it. Or they'll call in multiple subdivisions, and then you go, you make those points of contact, you get set up, you get everything, located, and then they want to jump somewhere else. And then, so it gets frustrating. And then what happens is it starts to break down pretty quickly. And it's not necessarily, like I said, it's not the parties here currently. It's the subs, it's the, these kinds of fly-by-night institution, companies that are just out there to throw it in the ground and help, quite honestly, create the bad records that are a product now.
You hit the nail on the head, though. That's
is
something we
true.
talk about. Over notification is a huge problem in an already labor-stressed system. But, and that was another one of the points of next practices is, when we started talking about this, it's like, well, yeah, I may call in 5 sites. I got to put my crew somewhere. They've got to go to work. We can't just be sitting idle. And Josh, I actually think we should say, well, but when you do that, now you're stressing our system. We're already stretched thin. So now you're actually quadrupling our work because we're now expected to mark 4 additional sites
Right.
than what you
Yeah.
need. And it was like, oh, just because sometimes just what you do for your own industry, for your own, job is actually counterproductive for you when you look at the system and not just yourself.
Well, and on the locator side too, and it doesn't, it's not an excuse, but it is a contributing factor. We've got the homeowners, we've got the operators that are maintaining the system. We have, a multitude of people that are calling in those tickets within the same footprints every single day. And so it becomes, in some statutes, some states, most of them, there's no limit that can be called in. They call in the entire state, and you are required to be out there. And so you got to do your best and do your due diligence to try to close those gaps quickly and within a set regulated time frame. And you're put between a rock and a hard place, and you're not going to make a lot of friends a lot of times, and that's the unfortunate part of it.
So Sarah mentioned over notification. Here's my question about that. How important is efficiency and waste reduction in this industry? And do we talk about it enough when we, at these conferences?
I think that, efficiency seems more of a philosophical thing. We actually need to talk about what it's costing you, right? I mean, the inefficiency is if you're over notifying, you've got locators doing things that they don't need to be doing, where they could be doing things that they need to be doing. They could be locating sites they need to locate. Then you have excavators who aren't really sure where they're going to be because now it's a game, right? It's coin toss. I mean, according to our latest, data, over 50% of the time, the excavator is not in a place where they can legally start work because it hasn't been located. Now you think about that and you start thinking about the dollar and cents around that. It's a serious inefficiency, but it's costing everybody money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to touch on the overlocating, so just for instance, one of the states we work in, after 14 days, we have to call a new locate in. So, and technically, I want to say they had 72 hours to get the initial locate on the ground, then we call a no response. So what is that, 3 days? They're coming out and locating it on the 13th day. Well, that was 10,000 feet we called in 14 days ago, and they come out on the 13th day and locate it. In the meantime, all the other providers have been out there and located theirs. On the 13th day, I'm not going to achieve what I initially called in 2 days. Well, you can't call in a refresher like in Texas. You could call in and just call remarks and get my ticket updated. In this particular state, you can't do that. So now they're having to send the guys that are actually keeping up back out to
mark it again.
what they did initially in the time frame that was required by law, because the guy that can't do it in the time frame decided to do it, and now I can't complete mine in the scope of work.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're not being held
How
accountable.
much of a challenge, now I'm going to ask a question, Jimmy, sorry, but how much of a challenge do you see with your crews from, like you work in multiple states, that the laws are different
Oh, yeah.
in each state? Because when you said that is something to me that, again, in the interest of we're just setting everybody up to fail. One of my examples is I went to do a 811 PSA a couple of years ago I'm in the DC metro area. I couldn't say wait 2 days to call because Virginia, Maryland, and DC all have different language. And I'm thinking that really hit home for me. Like, how can you be an operator, an excavator, or a locator and operate under these circumstances where you could go 5 feet down the street and be in Maryland and it's different?
Yeah, well, even on the software side too, you even have, there's a multitude of challenges to be able to capture. So if you're doing work for an operator that supplies gas or whatever within multiple states, each one of those response codes are different. And so you got to reflect what is necessary to the state statute within those confines of that state. And that becomes a challenge because to be compliant, and you got to make sure that communication is consistent. And so
We've been fortunate. We have a really good home base. We're based out of East Texas with Tina Sanders, and it doesn't matter if I'm in Maryland or wherever, she will have a contact.
Yeah.
If I know that I'm going to, Denver, Colorado, we're going to be up there drilling next month. We're going to go on and start learning the rules. And actually in New Mexico, when we got there a couple months ago, we had 811 come over and
give you
teach
some
me
training.
and the crew. But then we brought the guys in and we put on a sure enough seminar so everybody understood the letter of the law. Because in Texas, after 48 hours, I call no response. You got 4 hours to get there. If you're not
Right.
there, then I can legally drill. In New Mexico, I can't drill until all of them are cleared. So theoretically, on the 13th, 14th day, when they
Right.
mark it cleared, now I got to drill, but it's 10,000.
But even at being able to legally drill,
That doesn't mean you're
No,
safe.
it's not right.
Yeah,
But what it
that's-
does, it holds them accountable.
Well-
On the backside.
Yeah,
because
but
they are
if you're
scared
drilling
that-
and you hit something, you're the one that suffers. the
Not that
loss,
I'm
you
actually
know?
drilling, but they're worried that I'm going to drill.
Right.
So they're going to put their best foot
Yeah.
forward to get there
Right.
to save their infrastructure because
yeah.
as opposed to no repercussions.
No repercussions.
They don't get it more.
On the backside, I mean, the enforcement on all of this is probably one of the most important things of all. As you said early on in the conversation, if we have states that have better enforcement seem to have better outcomes because, to your point, everybody's kind of held accountable for their part of the deal in this entire process. Where that doesn't exist, we've obviously you're operating places like that. We do too. We've worked hard at, if nothing else, again, to build those relationships, to help those companies that do have limited resources or have very low motivation to get out there and mark out in front of us. We've developed the relationship to at least show them, look, we're not going to waste your time. So, and we're going to do our very best to make sure you don't have to mark this again. We're not going to waste your time on recalls. We're not going to do that stuff. We're going to come out, we're going to get this part banged out, and we're going to move on to the next. We're going to try not to bounce around, those kinds of things. All of that really helps in the process. Obviously, the bad actors are the bad actors. I don't know what we're going to do about that other than good enforcement, where, to your point, if you're not going to locate, if you're not going to do the things that you're asked to within the confines of the structure of the law, then you'll be fined or whatever it is, so that people are motivated to do it.
And the bad thing, as bad as it is right now, when that BEAD money gets into play, like it's going to be
bad. And that's the challenge. It's going to be a, we got to get it done. We got to get it done. I mean, the challenge is that we know for a fact that states that have robust enforcement laws and they actually enforce them have less damages. And it can't be the cost of doing business. I mean, the only way to get rid of the bad actors is to force a behavioral change. And the only way you do that is that you can't just be the enforcement penalty can't just be an add in to what it's going to cost us to do business there. It's got to be wow, we do that once or twice, we're going to be out of business. And I know that may sound a little hard hitting, but we have got to change the mentality around damage prevention, and that's the only way to do it.
It is part of listening to you all. I heard Chris from Stallion saying you pay for a third-party locator. I heard a couple of you say that there should be more communications between locators and excavators. Is part of this the root cause of these issues the fact that the excavator has no formal relationship with the locator? What I mean is the excavator is not the customer of the locator. And so, we talk about accountability. So the locator, whether it's in-house or outsourced, is like, okay, who's this guy calling me? Who's this guy calling me? He's the excavator. He's not my boss. He's not my customer. He's not even my customer's customer. Is that part of the root cause of a lot of these misalignments of interests?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, I feel very strongly about this. The excavator may not be the person writing the check to the locate company, but they are consuming that locator's services. And they can make that locator's life miserable, or they can make it way better, depending on how that interaction goes. So if there is an opportunity to create that working environment early on and create some rapport there with, the excavator is the one thing we know for sure, right? Every damage, regardless of whether it's the excavator's fault or not, in terms of true liability, they're there when it happens. And there are a lot of things that go on that they can do to help make it easier for the locate companies to get their job done, as long as there's reciprocation in all of that. So you have a lot of control as an excavator out there, a lot more than you think you do, depending on how good your approach is to the original scenario.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, Josh said it. The excavator is always going to cause it, but that doesn't mean it's their fault. And while they don't work for each other, they do both work for the facility owner. And how the facility owner decides to set up the business, relationship, and what they demand of the locator and what they demand of their excavator, that's what's going to drive the relationship. I mean, if they have now put pressure on their locator, go, you're going to get penalized. You're going to get penalized if you don't finish this. you tell the excavator the same thing, get it done, get it in. You're definitely not creating a, environment for them to stop and go, wait a minute, something's not right here. I need to call, and see what's happening. This all is great in theory if you create the communication, but again, money talks, right? And it's the financial pressure that is created that determines how that relationship goes.
That's what I was going to touch on was the excavator is the only one that has skin in the game at every turn. I mean, if that damage was mismarked, not marked, I'm the one that just took the downtime at 10 a.m. now. And I can't do anything until 4 p.m. whenever the gas company finishes fixing the line. There's no one that I get to bill for that. Granted, if the line had been marked and it was negligence on my behalf, I would have paid everybody's time that showed up there and the loss of gas and what have you. So the excavator is the only one with true skin in the game at every turn, yet the only thing we get really is our little piece of the drilling. We get to call in locates and do that. But at the end of the day, I mean, coming to these tables right here is where it's important because we are the ones that have more skin. Granted, I mean, you guys own the infrastructure out there in the ground, but at the end of the day, we are the ones that are going to be charged for it. If we do it, if it's not our fault, then we're taking it on the chin because we can't stop, leave.
Well, sometimes when it's not your fault, you take it on the chin
Right.
too.
Yeah, so do we.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just a product of a lot of different, animals that are out there. And it's, it goes into everything from, you've got, like we said earlier, I think I said fly-by-night companies, or even with bigger corporations, us being a smaller entity, we want to have that same point of contact for that locator within that area. But as I said too, it's not just us that are doing it today, it's us 5-10 years from now. And so to have that kind of mindset and mentality, years ago in statute, when these laws were designed and set in place, the majority of them, and the big meat and potatoes of the statutes within each of the states, it was based on that local excavating company calling in a ticket that only 2 or 3 utilities resided within that footprint.
Right, you got a 10-foot right of way now with
Oh,
4
yeah.
utilities, 5 utilities.
And abandoned utilities on top of it. And I tell our people, it is hard enough to locate it. You couldn't pay me enough money to excavate around these utilities. And so it's a problem.
Abandoned facilities are a big problem because to your point, I mean, it's one thing when a company buys somebody else's assets and they don't know where they are because the company that they acquired didn't know where they were. Now you're talking about abandoned lines, which are like the worst, right? Because nobody owns them. Some states are making some movement that they have to stay on a map, but who's liable? It always comes down to who's going to pay for it if something happens.
Yeah, well, and you also have areas of the country too, it's, the soils are in a manner to where bleed off is more, prominent. You got deeper utilities, water and gas that are touching one another, there's bleed off potentials that occur. There's all kinds of dynamics there. And so what they thought was a water line was actually an abandoned gas line that they had on their maps for all these years. And that too plays a part in incorrect prints and records. And it goes to show that daylight in the utility is important and really refining down those prints and records.
This is one of the, we're about done here, but I wanted to bring this issue up. So we're working in a market right now, and it was built by a contractor, let's just say there's 500 homes in there. The power company come in, put the power in the rear easement on the back of the houses, and they are not marking the power to the house. And they're saying that it's not on them.
I bet I
but
know what
it's
state
not
that
on
is.
me because I'm not a locate company. And at the end of the day, if I drill it and hit it, and I mean, we did because we got all clear from the power company. And lo and behold, we hit 4 houses.
The idea that state legislators are allowing that and then not saying, okay, when you buy your house, we're going to tell you have to do A, B, C, D.
Right.
You have to know, then the stuff should be on their plat.
Exactly.
It is mind blowing to me that somebody's going to think, especially like a first time homeowner, like you have no idea that you're going to be liable for what's in between your house and the street.
Right, and the sewer, I mean,
Seriously?
the sewer, that's the way it's always been explained to us. It's the sewer, basically the city owns the main and then the
That's right.
homeowner's responsible, which we normally do the right thing.
It's also a city-owned
Absolutely,
asset.
they're collecting money.
Right.
This all goes back to where we started a minute ago. People have been collecting money on all this, and they failed to do anything other than put it on the excavator to fix it. So now we run into the situation in the backyard with the power. I mean, that's a whole different animal.
Or
The
gas.
sewer is a sewer, but the power back there, so we've actually gone above and beyond. We've got a locate company in there staying in front of us to do this. But at the end of the day, like ultimately, who is supposed to do that? The homeowner? I mean, the meter's on the side of their house.
Right.
They're getting paid all the way up to the bottom side of that meter.
I was stunned when I heard that some states had passed laws to make that
I don't even know if
legal.
it's been passed yet, but they're trying to
Oh,
buffalo us right
there's definitely a couple where it's,
Yeah,
Well,
there's,
and I've seen it too, where it's, you know, you may have an agreement within one municipal utility electric company, for example, and it's private, even though it's metered on the home, it's private for the transformer to that meter. But then you go outside the county and they have some other type of purchasing.
Which outside the county, I mean, that's gonna be its own animal, or at least where I come from. But the bad thing is, this is direct bury too. It hadn't rained in 6 weeks in these areas, and we're out there potholing. You can't get a vac in the backyard, so we're potholing with a shovel with necessary means to locate it, and but it's direct bury cable.
there are a lot of organizations, a lot of companies that are paying to have third-party locates done themselves to
And
keep their own
that's
crews
what we've
safe.
done,
There are a
yeah.
lot of them.
Just to do it. And our customer we're working for is like, we're tapped out. We can't pay for anything else, you know? So it's something that we're doing to keep our employees, subcontractors, all that safe. But I mean, at the end of the day, it goes back to people collecting and not being held accountable.
Okay, I have a question, but before I ask it, I promise many people in the audience that if you have questions for this fine panel, please come up. So if you do, please come up and I can hand you the microphone. So my question is, Sarah, you brought up the fine CGA dirt report that was just released and the analysis of approximately 50% of tickets cannot be started on time by the excavator because one or more of the facilities have not been marked on time.
Correct.
So beyond the obvious downtime costs to the excavators that I'm sure Chris is quite familiar with, unfortunately,
With the proverbial
How-
downtime.
how else does this 50% number harm the industry, like the industry structure or trust in the system?
Well, it's what I said earlier. It puts everybody in and around it at risk. If you are under the gun and you're a small company that can't afford to wait, they may make the calculation that it's better to take the risk and start moving, which can be bad on a variety of fronts, not just disrupting other services, but injuring or, causing a fatality. I mean, but how you expect anyone to efficiently work in that kind of system where you're talking over half of the time you're not supposed to start working is a challenge.
so we've just taken a different tact as we've gone through this. There's it's a reality. You know that you're going to struggle. There's certain facility owners that are not going to be out there in the time frame that you would expect. So rather than continue to fight it in the traditional manner of downtime where we have crews standing around looking for locates, we've started putting people out in front of it. And that's injected cost into our process, about 3%. But on the backside, we're seeing 10, 20% improvement in the speed of deployment. Damages are down, at-fault damages are down like 90%. Total damages are down 60%. And so we decided to go about it a different way. Rather than pay for locates to be done, which truly just takes them off the hook. And the more that word gets out, the more people are, well, if we just ignore it, they'll locate it themselves and we won't have to. We've done it a different way where we've planned a little bit differently. We've stretched things out a little bit more, and we've got that one person out there running around chasing things around. And when we tell a crew, you're good to go on that site, you are good to go on that site. So we've eliminated the risk of downtime for locates for an entire crew. Do we have a person out there constantly fighting late locates? Yes, we do. But what we've done is taken the amount of time that crews are sitting on downtime down dramatically. those line strikes, we know that's another cause of downtime. Those numbers have gone down dramatically. And we've worked with the local folks that are responsible for those locate requests in a way that's far more productive. At least it seems to be. We're having a lot of good results as a result of that. But we're not doing their job for them. We're helping them be efficient in doing their job.
You're not enabling them?
Yeah. And it does seem to be working.
What's your footage on a weekly basis, you reckon?
So right now, I think active this week, we're out in front of 60 drills.
Okay, so that's probably 30,000, 50,000 feet.
Yeah, that's a big number.
Yeah.
It's not just our crews. These are our
Right,
subs.
subcontractors, right.
These are other companies that we just contract for. It's working in a way that it's just a little bit different tact. And it seems to be, it doesn't seem to be, it is absolutely working. And it is something that we're able to recreate now, not just in our closed environment where we started. Now we're out there kind of in more of a general open space, working with new construction companies all the time doing this kind of stuff. And it is taking root, and it's really making a difference. And that's where I think is big. Sara said we're not enabling. That is absolutely true. We're not doing their job for them. We're just helping make it easier for them to do their jobs.
Yeah, so we do like energy delivery dedicated, so we're not overburdening
Yeah.
a single locator with multiple utilities. And so, or all the utilities out there, I should say. The one thing I can't stress enough too, and we've done this so many times. I've been in this industry since I was a kid, really. I was 18, and the industry that I love so much. But what we would do and what we have done is we would accommodate a contractor that may have 20 bore rigs.
Yep.
And so, we're get it going, get it completed, and the next thing you know, they bring in 40 more bore rigs at the drop of a hat because they're a national contractor. And it's like, how can anybody accommodate that and close those gaps on top of what we're already getting and receiving for the landscaping and the homeowners and the utility companies, et cetera, the capital improvements. And
So that's the one thing that in our industry, my industry, is the ISPs, the MSOs don't foresee. They just say, hey, you did 50,000 feet last week, double your rig count, and let's do 100 this week.
Right.
They don't see that. And I don't think they will ever see that. That's where, as a contractor, as the prime, we stand our ground and say, hey, this is all we can do. We go talk to you. Maybe you guys can, after the holidays here, ramp up and we'll help achieve something. But the alternative, if I say no, then they're going to bring in contractor ABC over here, and he's going to put 20 in there. Well, now you're going to have to, legally you have to do some of his as well. So, it's like, it's getting them to the table.
well, and the other thing is when you have, and we've seen this before too, quite often, you'll have 3 contractors calling in the same area.
Right.
It's like, well, who's doing what?
Right, it's crazy.
So,
Yeah.
Who do you contact?
It's
Who do you talk-
redundancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a limit to what a crew can do in a week. But what we've really focused on is trying to maximize the amount of footage that any given crew is going to get in a week. And the conversations that you end up having then with those facility owners is not bring in more crews. It's, okay, this is our footage goal per week, and we're able to achieve that. Our goal is to achieve it with fewer crews. You have a lot more continuity in that regard. And if you can get, up the average footage for each one of those crews, you have fewer people involved in interfacing with the locate techs. And the locators actually probably can increase their footages as well, because we're increasing the efficiency on that. And we're talking with the facility owner saying, look, are we hitting your goals for footages for the week? Yes, you are. Okay, then do you care how many crews we have here? No, we don't. Just hit your footage goals. So we've kind of gone the other way. We're trying to move as few crews in as possible and just maximize the amount of footage that they're getting each week. That seems to work better for the locate techs.
This is a great discussion. I have to jump in here. We're running out of time, but I want to ask you all. Brandon mentioned some statutes are not up to date, and understanding that different states have different statutes and laws. But if you had a magic wand, what kind of one common state regulation or law would you change to improve damage prevention results?
Well, I would have to say that I know this would be very unpopular to some, but geographical limitations as far as how many tickets can be populated within a certain portion of the grid. Because here's what we have as far as problems within those type of territories is the distances in which tickets can be generated. When I first started, they could generate I think it was like 2,000 feet, but no more than 5 consecutive physical addresses could be housed within that footage. So they would have to break it up every 5 addresses. And what it does is it cleans up a lot of information, a lot of data, but the ticket volume's high. But the footages are a lot more manageable because the tickets are able to be parsed correctly. Then whenever you have these huge footages in the state of Kentucky, I mean, you've got these huge parcels, these huge ground, areas of ground that can be called in one single locate. And a multitude of utilities, you could be out there for a month.
And Kentucky also has mandatory reporting, but not mandatory membership, and there are plenty of spaces out there in which you'll be doing work where there could be a lot of exempt smaller municipalities.
And so just for that very fact there, you've got a heavily regulated state like Indiana or Kentucky, and then you have those kind of inconsistencies that are contradictory to
That's right.
being regulated. So it creates a big problem.
So anything else? So we have smaller ticket sizes and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but maybe mandatory membership. Anything else from you guys before we sign off here?
I would say enforcement, consistent enforcement that is equal to everybody who's involved in the process. And everyone is held accountable to the same standard of timeliness and accuracy.
Every utility.
And consistency of potholing and good plant records. If we could have those things and have those enforced, that would help this a lot.
Yeah, I would go with you on that. Accountability for sure. Just right now, the excavator is held accountable at every turn. We receive a bill. We're taking it on the chin with the downtime, that sort of stuff. So let's make it a two-way street. Because just say, for instance, in the last 30 days, I hit 3 lines. How many lines did we uncover that A, you didn't know about, B, were mismarked, what have you? All that incurred downtime too. So you're going to send me $15,000 worth of bills at the end of this month. In reality, that's $10,000 worth of downtime because of mismarked lines, that sort of stuff. So let's sit down at the table and go tick for tack on that, and let's hold each other accountable instead of you just trying to get that ticket out the door.
Right. Drive that cost. Drive that
Enforcement.
cost out.
Enforcement
Right.
has to have teeth.
Yes.
Enforcement has
And it
to
needs
have
to be a
teeth.
two-way street.
That's right, but it
Yeah.
has to be effective, and it has to have teeth.
It's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I mean, it's good for one, it's good for all. So,
All right, thank you. And on that note, we'll have to call the session. Can we get a hand for this fine panel? So we're going to be back here in about 11 minutes for the next session for those watching on a live stream. Thanks again to the panel, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
thank you.
Yeah.
in our law, a very vague use of subsurface utility engineering. Any project over $400,000, they're required to use an adequate level of SU. What's an adequate level for you guys? For me as a contractor, it's A. That's it. That's the only adequate level. You know it's there. You know it's 3 feet deep and you know it's right here. But then they hide behind that because, you know, we called in a one call. Well, you called in a one call and you know there's a gas main going down the road and you didn't think to say, hey, you don't have the services on your map. Right. They don't go back. Designers do the same thing. They check the box. I called in my design one call ticket. This is what I got back. I put it on the plans. And they're not, you know, then they're shielded. And ultimately it comes back to the utility company. If you know you have a neighborhood where you're unsure where things are, in the design phase, when you're asked for that design one call ticket, put the red flag up, engineer owner. Hey, listen, on 5th Street, and we know there's stuff there, but we're not sure where it is. None of our tracer wires are connected anymore. You know, we bought the system from whoever, so we need some time. We'll go out and investigate where it is, or you might want to put in your contract for somebody to go out and investigate where that is. And instead, everybody just shields themselves from it and pretends like it's not going to happen until the contractor goes out there and hits something. And then the fight begins. And if you would do that work up front, you know, then maybe a lot of this damage would be avoided.
I think the problem can be, especially on the design side, right? It's where the ROI of doing that design up front sits. So if I'm the utility owner, I'm paying for that design up front, or if I'm the utility installer project owner, I'm paying for that design up front. The project will see the ROI. The problem is today, you're the one eating all the downtime as the contractor. Every time you cross a utility not expected, or you have to wait while they're doing redesign because there's a box sitting where you were supposed to set one, right? All of that's felt by you, not felt, and you can't, like you guys are saying, you can't pass that to the utility owner or project owner in many cases, right? And so that can be part of where the dichotomy is, like, hey, yeah, there's a ton of ROI on a SU investigation, a private utility located, a map made up front, using it all to design where this utility should be. Problem is the ROI isn't felt. All the spend is at the utility level where they're trying to save money, and you guys are feeling the loss when they don't do it.
We've been involved with the 811 for the last year or two and been pretty heavily involved with attending the conferences, the summits, that sort of things. And the one thing we noticed on the 811, well, first off, hasn't nothing changed on the Texas 811 in 10 years other than just some minute twisting of words that doesn't equate to anything. But the biggest thing is they're not getting feedback from the actual people using the system. Everybody in there that's at these conferences are on the other side. They're the locate companies, there's the operators, they're that. They're not actually coming to the contractors and saying, hey, you're putting in 200 tickets a week. What can you do to make it better? What can we do to make it better? And we've even approached, and we've never heard back from them on giving feedback and ideas and things to make this more efficient for the contractors. But it would also bring everybody to the table. And it just seems like not everybody wants to come to the table in the grand scheme of things. The locators are fighting with the contractors, but the operators, they're worried about is protecting themselves. 811 is wanting to get their 50 cents a call, whatever it is. And it's gonna be a pissing match between the locator and the excavator. And the two that actually matter, the operator and the 811, they're shielded. So, it's literally us fighting it out.
So are we still at the stage where we think there's domestic terrorists, bioterrorists, international terrorists, like just waiting around every corner, waiting for municipality to release their data, and then they're going to jump on that? Are we still there? Are we past that yet? Or
well, I don't think any of us at this table are security experts, right? But I will say, in reaction to that, like I said earlier, 99% of every utility that I've ever dealt with in my career has been generally open and forthright about giving their information. Sometimes the information isn't very good, but I think that's more a function of just having bad information than them being reticent to give it the information. whether we're at a point or whether there are, security concerns with these facilities. Obviously, these are critical facilities. It is certainly something that should be considered and thought about, but to not be open and sharing with this information because of that, I think would ultimately be a great detriment to the utility world.
And I don't think, with 30 years in the gas and electric industry, operations, I have to make sure I say it. Us in the operations side, we know what's practical, right? We have to work within the politics and the general counsel guidance. So, it's up to us in operations to have our own organizations see how practical it is. So we cannot disclose where the water lines are, yet I can drive around the block and see where all the hydrants are, right? Or I can tell you where the gas lines are, but anybody can call a locator for any reason whatsoever, and somebody will go and show them where it is. So that's where the practicality comes. It's the industry push, the Common Ground Alliance organizations, the damage prevention councils, and again, working as a group and working within our organizations to show what's needed, what's practical. And yes, we could hold all the maps under lock and key, but that's not going to keep us any safer.
I would argue that makes us less safe.
Right. You're seeing a change of the guard too. Like you're seeing it. Like everyone has a mapping tool now. I think there's about 15 of them out there where it's becoming a more popular thing. And so as it becomes more mainstream, you're going to have people adopt those practices. And the benefits are there as we get more digital, right? We can have a more specific white line at the call center, and then there's some benefits in there that really push. So what I see is just people sometimes making statements about the security and the issues without being fully knowledgeable. Like Jemmy mentioned there, someone coming up said there's no real regulations or exist like that, right? And so it's a little bit of the curve. The industry is going to come. It just, things take time in our industry. We have a lot of utility companies, a lot of municipalities. Municipalities might be some of the slowest to change because there's some really small ones, and Esri is expensive, and so you're starting to see there's a couple small like IMGIS and DigSense or FiberSense, these other like small mapping companies that are coming in at cost-effective points. So you're starting to see better solutions available on the market because even the tiny municipalities, if they don't know where things are, they run into issues. Where they'll go to fix a water meter and they'll dig for a week, right? And so then they wasted, a bunch of digging, someone's lawn's all torn up and it's in the backyard. And so they have a lot of losses and stuff to it, so they need to know where their stuff is. And as the technology gets a little more cost effective and everyone can have it, I think it's just gonna come with time like most things in our industry.
And if they hold all that back from us, the safety aspect would be catastrophic, right? I mean, if we couldn't get the information that we get from our engineers on how do we do our job, right?
At some point, it's too many NDAs to sign. That's labor costs right there. You're gonna be chasing down people. We could save some locate costs right there.
Thank you for joining us for this roundtable by Planet Underground, hosted at Las Vegas by CGA's Fall Summit. Special thanks to those joining us on the live stream. I'm Jimmy Wang with the Creative Partners. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, kind of name, company, what they do, starting with Brian.
Yes, Briant Thomas. I'm at Computers, Inc., and I am their president of U.S. Business Development. We provide software for ticket management systems and excavation management systems.
Ryan White, I'm the managing director at USA North 811. We're the notification center serving Northern and Central California and the entire state of Nevada.
Adam Zeciri, we do utility locator training with Locating Dynamics, based out of Rancho Cordova, California. We do EM, GPR, acoustic, MAR-TK, all kinds of good stuff.
My name is Steve Mumm. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for GPRS. We do above and below ground mapping, and that involves private utility locating.
Thank you, everyone. So the topic for this session is the future of 811 centers. And before I jump into the question, if anyone on live stream has questions, please feel free to submit it, and the team here will try to get that inserted into the conversation. And people in attendance here, please, if you have any questions, walk up to the microphone. So the question is, how can we ensure the long-term viability and effectiveness of the 811 system in preventing excavation damages? And so anyone feel free to jump in, and then you guys can take it from there.
I'll jump right in. I truly believe that continuity between in excavation practices being similar across the country. We look at various states. There's excavators that work across multiple states. We have locate companies that do work in every state, and every state is different. Some of the regulations, whether it be enforcement or whether it be 811 system differences, there is a lot of differences across our country. And I think that the more we put in common, the greater success we'll see across our country.
I would agree with that. OCSI through the CGA is working on looking at ways that we can standardize some things across the various one call centers or the contact centers, as far as how the tickets are entered and similarities where there are similarities. Obviously, between the different states, you have a lot of local and state level excavation laws that need to stay in place. And so that's a little bit of a harder hurdle to get over. Trying to get 50 states on board with using the same terminology, language, processes, things like that. But I think we're headed towards a period of time of where you're going to see not so much standardization, but more collaboration amongst the states in trying to align with as many similarities as they can. Obviously, there's large organizations, large telecoms, things like that, that work multi-state across the country. And I know that they're interested in that. But I think that's definitely a piece to the puzzle that we're headed towards. I don't think it's the ultimate solution, but it is a step in the right direction at least.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Like in our industry, there's CFR 192, which, basically says if you're hooking up to something that travels across the state line that carries a product, basically a gas line, you have to hold an OQ. But there's really nothing federally mandated that says that you have to do X, Y, Z if you're going to locate pretty much anything else. You can just go for it, right? You can get on eBay right now and buy a locator for $1,000 and start locating. It's great to hear that, states are going to hopefully start to kind of have a more even playing field. The last session before us was talking about that as well. So that's great to hear. I think stuff like best practices have a lot of good recommendations, but they're just that, they're best practices. Right. But for states to actually come together and agree on a uniform legislation, I think is a great step in the right direction.
Do you think it's hard to get there because we're starting from such different points, or because the risks are actually different in the states and the systems need to be different?
I would say that, when you look at 811, or you could, before that, when you look at one call, and, one call's only 50-ish plus years old across the country. And so when everything started, when all these different states were starting up their platforms and their programs, it was all done locally and statewide to then meet the needs of the customers and the operators in that area. And there wasn't really any looking towards the future of this is going to be a massive, complete country system that we're all going to be utilizing. And so with that, we've had 40 plus, 50 plus years of practices, policies, legislation in some areas ingrained in how we do things. And I think it's hard for the 811 industry as a whole, as I'll call it, which is all the stakeholders that are involved in 811. I think sometimes it's hard for people to get over the way we've always done things, to look towards progress of the future and what we could do. There's a lot of folks that get ingrained in how we do things, and that becomes kind of the hill to die on for a lot of people.
Yeah, almost embedded in the question was the long-term viability, the question of, is it working today and will it work in the future?
Yeah.
Well, and jumping in there, I think it works today for how it was set up. And I really think that as we look at the 811 systems and how they're designed, as Ryan said, every state has some unique laws and legislation that has taken place to create a viable entity with the 811 center, which they do extraordinary work. But part of it is we look at the system, and as Ryan also stated, it's somewhat antiquated. It's 50 years old. In implementing new technology, how quickly are we able to ask our 811 center to implement the new technology? Are we seeing AI? Are we seeing the data that's been collected over the years being utilized for today's environment to help us be fast and nimble? I struggle with that part of it because I don't think that our system has been set up to create that type of environment. Not that the center doesn't want to be there, but that part of it is it's set up for an old system. The payers into the system are the utilities. And so then we go out there and tell everybody, hey, this system's free. It's really not a free system. And the users get frustrated because they're supposed to have a service that's provided and it doesn't get provided the way they want it to. And then they have somebody say, well, you get what you pay for.
Yeah. Well, and it's it's interesting, like it's not that the technology can't move at the pace that it needs to move. It's that the technology is only going to move as fast as the ones who are creating the policies and the procedures will allow it to move. We do have a fairly antiquated system of what we do as 811 centers largely. Now there's technology we use, there's things that we put in place that make it more efficient, that make it easier to use. And those are smaller steps that are being made towards progress. But, when you look, us being from the Bay Areas where we're headquartered and we're right by Silicon Valley, and things change on a dime with tech companies that see opportunity for revenue or new customers. And I think sometimes that does hinder us with the fact that we're nonprofit organizations. We're a service that's provided to keep people safe. We're not focused on generating revenue. We're not building widgets that we're trying to gain new customers with, although we're always trying to bring in those folks that don't use the system. But it's a little bit of a different situation as opposed to some of those companies we see in Silicon Valley where they're on the cutting edge trying to get that next customer to push their company forward. And we move at a much slower pace. So the technology is there to make rapid advancement, rapid changes to the process of 811. It's just whether or not we can get folks on board with that. And by that, I mean, center leadership, board of directors for the centers, the operators that fund us and we serve, the excavators. Everybody has their own lens that they look at this through. And usually it's, how is this going to impact me? And pushing towards processes and solutions that really benefit them in the job that they do. And that's what's interesting for us as it being a 811 center, is that we don't really have a dog in that fight. All three of you are vendors of some kind, providing services or technology and things like that. And so you have a little bit of a dog in the fight on where you think things should go that would benefit your organization, yourself personally, being successful in that. But as 811 centers, we're kind of in the middle of all that. And our task is to look at what's the best way to move this process forward that makes it easier to access, more efficient, more attractive to people to want to use, less hurdles, and ultimately safer for everybody that we serve. So
I kind of see 811 call centers taking on a larger role in that regard. Like, if there's a way to sort of be a centralized hub for these abandoned lines, that's a major issue nationwide.
Yep.
Who's at fault if they hit an abandoned line? Well, not the facility owner, because they don't exist anymore, right? Maybe that's a whole different conversation. Maybe we could talk about, should utility owners be charged with baking in retiring the facilities that they install? Different conversation, right? But as far as capturing that data in the first place, if we know that it's there, maps and records, every utility owner has a mapping department, no matter how small, they still are there. So, maybe 811 call centers might assume some of that data. I see the role potentially shifting a little bit in terms of like a data repository. Because you guys are right there in the middle. So who better to kind of, I guess, own that process? Even though not necessarily, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we've, at USA North, we've really started trying to focus on that. So
that's great.
With the abandoned lines situation, we kind of put together a plan and an idea where we could house the abandoned line data and then send that as an additional piece of information along with the ticket when somebody's submitting the ticket. And then that process is no longer reliant upon the operators and the locators to market in the field or to provide the information or whatever it is. We now have it as a data set that we can provide as additional information.
Another layer.
Layer that is provided along with your ticket. And how much better would that be for excavators in the field?
Right.
To get their ticket, they get a list of utilities that have active facilities in the area, but then they also get a list of abandoned lines with a map that shows the digital information of where those abandoned lines are.
The tricky part of there is they might not even be abandoned anymore. They might house fiber, right? Because a lot of times if there's an abandoned facility, it could be a pipeline, they might use it as a fiber conduit for a third-party fiber company, which is really interesting.
So you touched on a point that we're interested in, and that is looking at ways that we can expand the service that we offer, away from just the traditional model of an 811 center, but what additional things can we do as an 811 center to provide information and services that will benefit the excavator and ultimately benefit the operators and the protection of their facilities. So you look at things like overhead lines, well, traditionally that exists outside of the 811 center because we are all about underground and buried facilities, but overhead lines is a huge issue. Striking overhead lines, there was a death here locally in Las Vegas, I think 2 years ago, from a gentleman that struck an overhead line. And so, and then water assets as well, which doesn't impact a lot of states, but us being in the Bay Area and having the Bay, there's facilities that go across the Bay. Okay, well, those facilities need to be protected as well, but it's outside the original kind of scope of what 811 centers have traditionally done. So trying to find additional ways that we can provide more layers of information or processes that keep people safer beyond what the traditional 811 center used to do or historically has done.
That's great.
One example that we've been working on to expand the way that 811 centers can serve is by using our private utility data as a member of an 811 to give those who are excavating more information about what's on the site. just more information, because
Yeah.
it is the public lines that intersect with those private lines that can create more context to that digging environment. And we've seen massive reductions in dig up rate when an excavator has more information on that site.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
great.
That's a common complaint we get at the 811 center is, hey, you market your platform of 811 in general as a way to find the facilities before we dig.
Right.
Well, they only mark to the meter. So what about the rest of our facilities on the site? How do we protect ourselves from that? I'm not digging in the street. I'm not digging in my driveway. I'm digging in the backyard, and a previous homeowner put in a gas line that fed a shed or a shop back there.
Or a
Well, how-
business campus, or a
Yeah,
trailer
so
park, or a college, or a hospital. Yeah.
So what do I do about that, right? And so I think that's a great point you bring up, and another layer of data that can be provided to complete the picture. Because right now, if you're a homeowner, obviously professional excavators, they know how to work with that situation for the most part. But if you're a homeowner and you're trying to do the right thing, but you're only getting 60%, 70% of the information you were expecting, it kind of puts you in this situation where you're like, why did I even do this? Like, I'm not,
Right.
this is not what it was marketed to me as. Now I got to take an extra step. Are they likely to continue doing that in the future? Or are they saying next time that they're going to dig that was too much of a headache? There was too many hurdles. I'm sure there's nothing there. I'm just going to go ahead and.
That ties right into a couple different things, right? The GPS RTK integration that we're talking about, they just did the case study. I believe it was Minnesota. That was part of the DIRT report as well. I think that's great, and I think that's where we're headed. How does that information get back to the utility owner, right? Is it, if you're using a ticket management system and you're using a third-party software, is that another need for 811 to kind of be the central data, depository where it transfers the data from, the locator back to the operator? And then what about the final line of defense, the guy dropping the bucket? Is the excavator going to become part of the one-call process where they're required to start validating the marks prior to dropping a bucket, prior to digging?
But how do you bridge that gap between states? Now, every state having their own one-call center, some states having multiple one-call centers. How do you bridge the gap with the information that's able to be collected? Because I truly believe that our excavators are able to collect a tremendous amount of data, but they don't, because they don't know what to do with it. Our locate service providers are able to collect a tremendous amount of data, but they keep it within house. And the utilities don't want to share any data because they're afraid that the sky's falling. Checking a little out there with the
Security
utilities.
concerns.
Well, I would say it's liability concerns, not necessarily security concerns. So there's so many ways that it's not coming back. But then when you have 54 one calls across our 50 states, and they're all offering something different or a different interface, how do you expect a excavator or a homeowner who may have multiple homes, or a property management company that's operating in different states, to be able to interface with and go, this is how we get this information? I struggle with that part of it, because I believe the 811 center wants to be able to do that. But when each one is different, how can they? In what level of reliability do they have when every state is different?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say the word common ground, right? We obviously need to find common ground and form an alliance, right? Obviously, pun intended. But I think that's conversations like this is hopefully a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think first things first, they need to agree on a tolerance zone. How about that?
So these 811 centers, there was a term that we used to use to describe them that I think we're not supposed to use a lot anymore, but that's one call, right? And I heard Brian use that term. Just in this conversation, you all have identified some activities that are not typically handled by 811 centers, right? Private locates, abandoned lines, marine lines, and probably design engineering tickets that are not handled well. How important is it that these 811 centers are the quote unquote one call for pre-excavation, pre-design activity? And what would it take to get these other, not even related, but really overlapping services handled at these at these 811 centers?
Yeah, I think you're defining a process, or I think that's what we're trying to define here is what is the process, what is the component, where do they fit? You know, is it a do all, be all, end all? Probably not. But is there a bit more to it? Probably. You know, like state legislatures, if they agree on a tolerance zone, maybe we can agree on the process. Maybe there needs to be a third-party locator, kind of like what Ontario, Canada is doing with the dedicated locator. You get a list of people that can potentially come out and help you with your project before 811 comes out. You know, maybe, you know, could it be 30 to 90 days prior? You know, then you have to wait the 2 days in California anyway, prior to excavation. But then what about the excavator validating those marks before they dig? You know, if the goal is damage prevention, let's prevent damages.
Yeah, I believe I'm going to say one call because we like saying one call in California because we still heavily promote calling 811 and we think it's been successful for us to translate people who call 811 to get them to somebody that can explain the process and then translate them into other surface opportunities that we have, whether that's doing tickets online or things like that. So I know that you're not supposed to say that, but I'm still going to say it. So, but I think the one call needs to be the hub for all of that. I say that we don't have a dog in the fight in the sense that we're not beholden to one party over the other. Other people would argue that, well, you're funded by the utility operator, so you kind of have to move at their whim. But, you know, the way that our board works and the way that our relationships with our utility operators work, there's not really ever pressure put on the one call center to implement something that would benefit the operators to the detriment of the excavators or homeowners for that matter. You know, everybody is out for damage prevention. They look to the one call center to provide new ideas, you know, new processes, new technology, push them in a direction that we need to go, and then we discuss it and we decide if it's worth implementing or not. So I think the one call center should be the hub of planning and design. Get that information. Now you're ready to dig. You get your ticket. It includes underground facilities, it includes overhead assets in that area. If you're in a waterway, we'll provide you with waterway information, asset lines. I think all of that is tied into utility safety, which is what the one call center needs to become, is focused on utility safety, not underground utility safety. And I think when you consolidate that into the one call center, you provide a better experience for the end user and ensuring that they have all the information for their job and that they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get that. There's a excavator here in Las Vegas Paving, and Scott with Las Vegas Paving did a session at the CGA this year in Colorado. And he said, you know, 811 is 1% of what we do on a job site. There's 99% of other things that we have to do for that job other than 811. But when you make that 1% cumbersome or difficult to use or take more time than it should, you're now putting a barrier in place that might get people to question, do we need to do this? Should we do this?
Well, it's the law, but I was just thinking about something as you were saying that is, does it need to continue to be a free service if it's relied on so heavily and they expect everything? If one call centers are doing more, is it going to become a paid service?
Well, is that pay to play?
Maybe, but I mean,
And I would put it out there. I think there's excellent performance across our country in the 811 system, but I also believe that there's better collaboration between some than others. And, you know, I'm going to throw out there that there's regional meetings for some of the regional 811 or for some 811s where they get together regionally, they discuss what's happening in their region, and they're able to discuss legislation activities or regulation activities, such as, you know, what's a tolerance zone, or what's a caution zone? How many hours should it take before we can dig? some of those discussions happen at the 811 levels, and that's done in regional meetings. Not every part of our country has those regional meetings. They don't, some of these one-call systems are standalone, and they rely on coming into a CGA meeting, getting information, taking it back and implementing it or not implementing it, talking with their board or not talking to their board. A lot, you know, I think there's a lot of dynamics that go to whether or not it could be a paid system. I think there needs to be more, and I'll say this, I think there needs to be more pay into the system from other entities, because I think they would receive a whole lot more out of it if they paid for it. There's the idea of you get what you pay for, and I think there's a lot of that out there.
Well, yeah, we were talking about a lot of changes, and I was just kind of riffing on, you know, obviously there's federal subsidies, there's utility providers, you know, buying into the system, but at what point does it need to start becoming a shared cost?
Well, and they've done that in Pennsylvania for a number of years. I'm not sure of any other states where they do that, but in Pennsylvania, the excavators have a membership fee to the one call center, the same as operators. Now the excavator membership fee is a lot less, but they have a little bit of a stake in the game because now they're paying into the system as well. But I think if that's the case, then there needs to be equal representation for those excavators onto the board, to have a say in the direction of practices and policies and legislation in the state, and make them really part of the process.
I wholeheartedly agree with you there. You know, my whole career, I started professionally in '99 in doing this stuff, and it's always been sort of a finger pointing game. I think it's gone down over the years thanks to, you know, groups like CGA. I think that, you know, we're talking about things that directly impact these people's livelihoods and their lives, and they don't want to be hitting anything, you know, at the end of the day.
Exactly. And I think that the excavators have been somewhat of an underserved customer of the 811 system, but and at the same time, you know, they're not sure what to expect from it. Their experience from 10 years ago still rings through their minds today, and it's a much different experience that they have today than they probably had 10 years ago at the 811 system.
Yeah.
And
well, I would say, like, I don't know if we've gone way off topic here, but getting the stakeholders involved and making them part of the process will lead to results that you're looking for. You know, here in the state of Nevada, you know, we have NUCA that's heavily involved. We have the NRCJ that's heavily involved, and we have a bunch of stakeholders, whether they be locators or excavators or operators, that are all involved in this process to work together, to get on the same page, to drive the change that they want to see in the state. And that's shown to have great success here in the state of Nevada. It's one of the best performing states in the United States as far as utility damage and things like that. So I think getting people in the room together, like you were mentioning, Brent, and talking about these issues and figuring out ways to move something forward, and making sure that you're not getting stuck on your position, that you're willing to talk it through, you're willing to accept alternative ideas. And, you know, some things aren't always going to go your way, but ultimately for the state, it will help push things forward with that collaboration. And like I said, we've seen it here in the state of Nevada where it's worked greatly. So,
and changing the conversation from damage to creating value, I think helps as well. We know the world is very complex, especially under the ground. It's getting more complex every day. You go out to a site and you'll find that the as-built has a line one place, but actually when they were installing that line, they ran it somewhere completely different. So that as-built is not accurate. And we update those primarily in two ways. We're either exposing and getting a good GPS on that location, or we're using GPR to get a 3D view of where it is in the ground without exposing. As we're able to feed that back into the system and create better maps and updated maps, I think we create more value for the different stakeholders that are out there. And that could be a primary role of the 811 systems going forward, to bring these stakeholders together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a group that's a spinoff of ASCE UESI, and they're heavily involved in, working with the 3802, now 3822 standards. You're talking about QLA, and I'm probably, riffing on some jargon here, but quality level A, right? The definite position of the line as well as size versus QLB, which is, electronic equipment, C, basically there's a structure, but you can't get a good locate on it, and then D maps and records, which is the worst quality data, and bringing that up to speed, there's still utility providers out there wheeling off measurements as their sole way of marking in the United States.
Well, in to that, collecting this data and having the 811 system or having another system that would be out there that collects it, there's the need for the data. And for the longest time in the industry, we've heard, well, it's not A-level data, so we don't want to collect it. And I just go back to the thought that when Google started out, I don't think that every piece of data that Google had at their beginning was A-level data that we would expect to have in a search now. But you've got to start somewhere, and if you're not going to collect it, then why are you doing the work? Really, because there's different levels of work of the data that can be collected, and we need to collect the best that we can. But if you're out there and you're able to collect some sort of piece of data, that's going to do something for the next time, either that you're out there or the next person's out there. And there needs to be a starting point. We have technology that surrounds us. AI is thriving. You turn on the morning financial news and you're going to hear all about Taiwan Semi and NVIDIA and other organizations like that, because they're driving so hard on AI. And what are we doing? We don't want that information. It's not good enough. Well, I hear that it's not the best quality piece of information that I could send back to Ryan and his team, but I guarantee you it's better than sending nothing back to Ryan and his team.
Yeah.
I may agree with you, but I don't think it's a long-term solution.
I'm not saying
Knowing where
long-term.
something is plus or minus 6 feet is not going to help prevent that damage in the end.
Absolutely, it's not going to prevent the damage, but it could create another call and could get somebody back out there.
So I want to tie together kind of 2 points that the panelists made. One is Adam said, does 811 need to be free? Right? Mm-hmm. And Briant said, excavators are underserved customers of the 811 system. And it's related because my question is, if someone is not paying for something, are they really a customer? Okay, and this is not a riddle, because if you're not paying for something and you don't have skin in the game, I mean, you have skin in the game in that you could get injured, right? But kind of money talks. So is that part of the opportunity here to ask that question at least? I'm not recommending anything specifically, but just ask the question. Does it need to be a free, quote unquote, free service? And would everyone, including excavators, benefit if it were not a quote unquote free service?
Yeah, I think you're talking about buy-in, right? And I think if they have a seat at the table and they're on boards and are allowed to help steer the conversation, then there is a value to that, I believe, down the road. Because if there's a lot more work that needs to be done to get there, somebody has to pay for it. Why not? Obviously, utility owners can only do so much, right? But if you are using a paid service, you're buying into the system, having a seat at the table, you're literally helping steer the decisions being made.
Having worked for a utility previously, I believe that a lot of these utilities would tell you that they are the largest excavators in the states in which they reside. So their seat should cover the excavator. Whether or not that is a valid response, I'd probably say no, because I believe that the representation, it really becomes a very difficult conversation to go, how do you put a representative on the board, and what level of activity are they going to be? Are they going to be a voting member? Or are they just going to be a member? And there's a lot of, since the utilities are paying for the work, They look at it as if they're already paying for that vote.
I,
Different.
yeah, I'm not thrilled about the idea of not making it a paid or not making it a free system any longer. If that were to be a consideration, I would rather push for something where it's a free service to the homeowners and the weekend warriors and the people that are doing that, and that the professional contractors, there might be a fee to them. But at the same time, with that fee, what are they getting for the fee? If they're getting increased representation on the one call board, then great. Do they get priority access to locates? Do they get their locates handled faster because they're now paying for this service? I think just to simply begin charging them and provide the same service that they've been provided before doesn't make any sense. So you have to figure out, it makes them have some skin in the game, but at the same time, there needs to be something that comes along with that. And priority locates doesn't make sense because the locate industry is stressed to the max already. We already have situations in most states where tickets have late locates because they're not able to get to the volume on time.
I think it was 34% or something like that was, mislocated things, according to the report that just came out. And then the thing that followed that was, like 33% was, mismanaged excavation practices, so, yeah, I think that with the conversation would definitely need to incorporate something like a list of people that could serve those excavators with a third-party locate prior to the whole 811 process kicking off,
And
potentially.
Yeah, potentially it could be, a list of services that would streamline help them with some of that paperwork. I think there's a lot of excavators out there that look at the system and going, I can only do so much. I've got so much manpower in my office. So there was a time that most of the locates were called in on a Monday morning because that's when the office staff was available to call in locates and get it done. So they'd all come due at the same time. I think some of that's been addressed and talked to with many of the excavators, but it's still something that occurs. So how do we get to the excavator to help them streamline their business process? Can the 811 system through their system provide a list of services that are out there that can help somebody streamline the practice that they have inside their office, whether it be a piece of software or it be a locator that can do, on-demand locating?
Yeah, to just go back real quick was the tiered process. I think that you were trying to mention, right? So, maybe homeowners, still there, it's free. Smaller contractors up to, so many employees, so much revenue, however it works. And then going up to, the biggest excavators, and then there's still the issue of Caltrans is not a member of one call to my knowledge in California. So,
No.
And I can't imagine the task that it would take for them to have to break up all of their right of way to be able to service something like that.
Yeah, it's not like a philosophy question. It's a manpower and cost.
Definitely.
Because they haven't had the benefit of being part of the one call from the beginning and slowly building up their services and their staff and the funding from the government and things like that to provide from it. So now they're just going straight from 0 to 100. And that's the hurdle that can't be, conquered, basically.
And I would say a lot of the smaller utilities and providers out there are in the same situation when a lot of funding comes in to a utility sector for them to go out and build up their or change out their services. These municipalities or service areas are expected to respond the exact same way, but without the funding that comes behind it for them to be able to respond. How do you go and hire somebody for a temporary job when you don't know how much work is going to come your way? You're just waiting for it to hit the books, and then you're going out to do this, trying to accomplish a piece of work that's being assigned to you. And you're very reactive rather than looking towards the future. And I think that some of the communication that needs to take place in our industry falls into that category. Is it's future planning, looking at the other entities in our community, making sure that we're being a responsible community member, and taking that and going, okay, this is how we're going to communicate across the community, so we can make sure that we're not putting customers out of our homeowners and our community members out of service, so they're living in the dark, or they're without their internet, or without their cell phone, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But I think there's a tremendous need for communication, and I think that part of that starts at a regional level, and I think that we're really struggling in the 811 industry to be able to do something regionally as well as nationally. And if we can't do it regionally, we're not going to be able to do it nationally without national legislation coming in. And personally, in my opinion, the odds of a national legislation is very slim of ever happening. We have a lot of state laws on the books.
Yeah.
So if I can jump in there, Brian, you mentioned 54 811 centers. Do we need 54 811 centers in the U.S.? And what are the cost benefits to those, and what are the barriers to maybe consolidating? I mean, maybe we need 80. I don't know. It's an open question.
Well, the problem, you could run the United States out of a single 811 center. The technology's there to be able to implement the various state laws and requirements. It's a simple drop-down field. You select what state you're in, and then the software reformats the entry of the ticket to match that state. So you could run the United States out of one call center, but I think that what you lose is you lose that local connection to the stakeholders there and working through the problems that are happening on a local level and trying to drive improvements with the center, improvements in legislation and things like that. So I think that's the piece you lose if you go to a national system. It can be done technology-wise. It might be easier for a lot of people in certain industries for that to occur, but I think you lose that collaboration on a local level.
The panel before us, the conversation came up about, excavators and locators, and even we were touching on that, about them not necessarily being customers of locators, right? But they absolutely are. Like when we locate something, who's the customer, who's the client in that exchange? It's the excavator, right? An excavator on the previous panel said excavators have more skin in the game than anybody, because even if they don't, cause the damage, they still have downtime all day due to that damage. Even if they don't get billed for it, they're still out for that day, So I think, forgot where I was going with that. I had a point.
I think we just need to look at what areas are preventing progress, or what areas are slowing down progress, and find ways to provide solutions to get past that. So I am a huge proponent of a complete overhaul to the 811 system. I think if you look at internationally, if you look at what other countries do the 811 service differently and have far better results as far as damages than we do in the United States. And so I think a lot of these things can be, and people don't like this, but I think a lot of these problems can be solved very easily if we reformat the way that we handle the process of getting a ticket and getting locates and proceeding with your job. I think that if you put the power in the hands of the excavator, I've talked to several large excavators in California that basically have told me if I can get a set of plans with my ticket and I can hire a locator on staff that I pay and is my locator, we could more accurately do the locating job, because now the reliance on those marks on the ground are tied to us.
In Canada and Australia, that's how they do it.
In Australia, it's the Australian model.
Yeah.
And the private utility locating
Right.
model, where we're aligned with the excavator. They're our customer. We're focused on helping them deliver on time, on budget, safely, keeping their reputation intact. And it is a very different alignment the private utility locating market.
Yeah. So
So on that point, we have to wrap it up. But before that, one last question and quick answers, please. Briant, you said the 811 system works today for how it was set up 35, 50 years ago. So magic wand question, you guys could change one thing about the system, the process, whatever, what might it be?
Since you called me out on that, it would be the information that's collected and returned to the locator and the excavator. I believe that the information, we're in an information age, and if we're not sharing information, then we're stifling the ability to accomplish the work and the demand load that's out there. And we have that information. We have some one-call centers, we have decades of information that could be utilized. It just has to be put to the test. And I believe also with that once we begin collecting the data and using that data, it's only going to get better. Yeah, it may not be the best quality of information right now, but it's only going to get better once we start implementing the use of information.
yeah, I would agree with Briant. Collection of the information, I think the Australia model is the model that is the most successful way to accomplish getting jobs started on time and preventing damages. I think the system needs to be recalibrated so that the one call center is working with utility operators to collect facility line information. That information is being disseminated to the excavators. The excavators have their own locator on staff that is responsible if they want marks on the ground that they can provide them. It gets rid of the issue that we have with late locates. It puts the excavator responsible for the locates that are there, and it allows the process to move along faster than it does today.
With respect to our Australian friends, I think that we could improve their system. And all I can say is USA, USA.
We can edit that part out. No, just no, they love it. Yeah, I think incorporating mapping information as it happens on the fly, using software that's currently available, technology that's currently available, using whether or not it's RTK based or, PPS based. The data has to be collected accurately, right? And obviously on time. And I think we need to bring it all together.
Tactically, I think we get there by opening membership to those who have data and letting them contribute data to the 811 systems. And then primarily just shifting focus from damage prevention of the utility to serving the excavator and helping them deliver on time would make a big difference in how we deliver for the industry.
And on that note, thank you. Can we give the panelists a hand? And thanks to everyone here in the audience and those on the live stream for staying with us all the way through almost 5 p.m. Pacific time, especially the people on the East Coast. We're going to be back tomorrow morning at 8:15 a.m. for more panels like this. Hope you all can join us. Thank you.
No, you were supposed to go.
Thank you, Jimmy.